with the filibuster, Adam, can you tell the viewers how it came about? Because it seems like, we look back at history, Adam Burr and the edit of that, and we talk about that and then go into Calhoun and the Confederacy. But can you tell the viewers to start off how it came about?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me here. I'm glad, I think I share your listeners' ideological viewpoints here. One of the things about Senator Reid, as a tangent, we had Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, future presidential staffers, working closely in his office with us. He was, he recruited those kind of people to come work for him. So one of the things I love about working there. But anyway, so for the history, so the thing about the filibuster is it's funny because I think it's what a lot of people think about when they think about the Senate. If they know anything about the Senate, they know about the filibuster, and they think of Jimmy Stewart and the Mr. Smith Goes to Washington movie, as integral part of the institution. What's interesting about this, and I get to this in the book, is that it actually wasn't part of the original Senate. And not only was it not included, the framers in the way they designed the Senate did not want it to be there. They were very clear. The Senate was supposed to be sort of the more thoughtful chamber, the more deliberative body, in contrast to the House, which is sort of rough and tumble place. But they didn't want a minority to be able to block what the majority does. The reason for this was that they wrote the Constitution in the shadows of the Articles of Confederation, which was, the first attempt at government in the Revolutionary War. And the Articles of Confederation were a disaster for the specific reason that the Congress, under the Articles, required a supermajority to pass most major legislation. So it wasn't majority rule. It had to be, to 2/3 to pass anything. The idea was this would foster consensus, and you would get everybody together, and there would be cooperation. But in practice, it happened to be the opposite. It allowed anybody, a minority, to block anything that the majority wanted to do. And so when the framers created the Senate, they tried to strike this delicate balance of saying here was an institution that's supposed to be deliberative, but it should foster debate. Debate can go on for a reasonable amount of time, unlike the House where there's often only like an hour of debate. But after a reasonable amount of time, after the group that was in the numerical minority on a given issue, after they had their say, it was time to hold an up or down vote, majority rule, and move on. What happened was, starting in the middle of the 19th century, the slave power started to be outnumbered. They saw the march of progress on its way towards abolishing slavery, bringing new states into the Union as free states. And so they realized they needed to increase the power of the numerical minority in the Senate. And John Calhoun was a senator from South Carolina, sort of a spiritual godfather of the Confederacy. And he was the leading advocate of the slave power in the Senate. He devised what we would now identify as the filibuster, and was its leading innovator during this period as a way to increase the power of the minority to block what the majority wanted to do. So I just want to be really clear that the main impetus for this innovation came from the desire to protect slavery. Calhoun wasn't the only person who used the filibuster. There were some other filibusters around that time, but this thing was so new it didn't even have a name. The name filibuster didn't come till later, and he was the chief sort of innovator, practitioner, and he did it in the guise of this idea of minority rights, and the idea that a minority should be able to block what a majority wanted to do. What's important about this time is that at this time, the Senate was still majority rule. So all Calhoun could do was delay bills. He could talk on the floor in the Jimmy Stewart style, hold up a bill, delay it for weeks. He would, work with other allies to sort of hand the baton back and forth and keep the delay going. But ultimately, after that delay was done, the bill still came up for a majority vote, up or down, pass or fail. It was a big innovation at the time. The ability just to delay was a big deal. But it still was not enough to block bills altogether. What happened in the 20th century was that another group of racist senators, Jim Crow senators from the South, white supremacist senators, avowed white supremacists, not my term, it was how they described themselves. They took Calhoun's tool to delay bills and made it even stronger and started to give it the power to block bills altogether. They took a rule that was introduced in 1917 that for the first time put a supermajority threshold on the books, and then they repurposed it and started to make it the de facto threshold but only for civil rights bills. They only applied this higher threshold. At the time, it was 2/3 of the Senate to civil rights bills. So from the Jim Crow era, from the end of Reconstruction until 1964, the only bills that were required to, as a matter of course, to pass a 60-vote threshold or a supermajority threshold were civil rights bills. Every other bill during this period still passed or failed on a majority rule basis. What's happened now is that we've taken that standard that was used by a minority of senators to block civil rights, and for a bunch of boring procedural reasons I won't bore your listeners with, it's become very easy to use. You no longer have to hold the floor. You no longer have to stand on the floor and give a speech, but you can raise the threshold for passage on any bill you want to 60 votes. This has become normalized and accepted as normal, but this is really a recent development of the last few decades. And that's what the debate comes down to today is, should we continue to allow senators to apply this supermajority threshold to every issue across the board? Or should we go back to the sort of old talking filibuster where if you wanted to use minority rights, if you wanted to delay a bill, you actually had to hold the floor. And when you were done, the bill would come up for an up or down vote. So that's the history I lay out in the book. But it's really important for folks to understand that the sort of deeply racist nature of the evolution of this rule, because this is just a fact of American history and how this institution has evolved.
Well, I think back when you talk about the talking rules, something that happened during, I'm sure, your time working with Senator Reid, with Ted Cruz was up there reading Green Eggs and Ham and Dr. Seuss for
Right.
quite a bit of time. So, that was a little foolish him reading that, but hey, I guess he had to do what he had to do up there.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of the idea of the Senate. It's like more, if someone wants to come to the floor and they want to try to persuade people to come around to their view, great. I mean, I think reading Green Eggs and Ham is silly. That's not really an attempt at persuasion. That's just obstruction. But, let them have their time. Because the thing with the Ted Cruz was that, we just waited him out. I remember, sitting around while he was doing this. I was just, up in my office answering emails while he was going on and on. And, you can only stand on the floor for so long. He was done and the business proceeded. So, that's the kind of thing I think we should go back to. I think that if you're going to use it, you shouldn't use it to read Green Eggs and Ham. You should use it to try to make an argument, try to change the minds. But, that is the role of the Senate. You should give the group that's out of power a platform to have their say, but they shouldn't be allowed to block the majority from proceeding if you can secure a majority vote. That's simply the nature of the democracy. The framers, again and again, even though they were very concerned about checks and balances and preserving minority rights, that again and again, they stated that majority rule is the basic principle of a democracy, and decision points ultimately have to come down to majority rule.
What do you think about what your former boss, Senator Harry Reid, said about Biden not getting rid of the filibuster?
So I actually think I saw that quote differently. I saw that the Hill reported it as not optimistic about the filibuster, but when I spoke to him, I speak to him frequently, it was more about not optimistic that the Republicans were going to cooperate. I think he was saying that Biden wants to seek out Republican cooperation. He's not optimistic that approach is going to work. I actually just spoke to him yesterday. So I think that, what he thinks is Biden has said repeatedly that he wants to pursue bipartisan cooperation. He thinks Republicans will have an epiphany, is the word he used, and that they will come around and give him the cooperation he needs to pass some of his very good, progressive, big ideas. I am less optimistic. I think that cooperation is not going to happen. And I think it's just a structural factor here. Every incentive the Republicans have working on them is pushing them to obstruct. They're only in the minority by one seat. And so with the upcoming midterms in 2022, all they think they have to do, because it worked under Obama, is obstruct Democrats, make them look bad, prevent them from delivering on their promises to depress our base, and then ride that voter frustration back to the majority for Republicans in 2022. This is the strategy they used against Obama. I hate to say it worked, but it did. And so they see no reason to change up that strategy. So, no matter how persuasive President Biden is, I just think he's not going to be able to overcome those structural forces. So I think it'll take some time for this to happen, but I think a lot of the big things he wants to do are going to run hard up against this filibuster. And eventually it's going to come down to a question of whether Democrats basically want to give up on the Biden agenda or change the rules to allow a majority to pass these bills like the way it used to be in the Senate.
It feels like deja vu, though, Adam, because we look back at the years of the Obama administration and we look at these two senators now, but there's a couple more, I believe. But Joe Manchin, Kristen Sinema, who don't want to get rid of the filibuster. Think back to the Obama years, which there was quite a few senators that did give the president trouble. We look at Ben Nelson from Nebraska, Joe Lieberman from Connecticut, Max Baucus from Montana. I'm sure you had your rumblings with these guys while you were up there on Capitol Hill. So are you worried about this happening where these two senators and maybe a couple others don't push this to get rid of the filibuster or even to reform it in any way, shape, or form? And this ends up hurting the Biden administration. And we wake up in 2022 after the election with another wallop like we saw in 2010.
I'm very concerned about it. I think that's a real risk. And I do think that if these senators don't shift, that's what's going to happen, and it's going to hurt all Democrats. But I also think that's the reason that I do think there will be some shift down the road. Look, senators are very responsive to peer pressure in terms of their fellow senators. And look, I think that right now Manchin and Sinema share this view that they can help facilitate bipartisan cooperation. And you know what? Go for it. But I think that it's going to become clear quickly that they can't do that, and the cooperation is not happening. And what's going to happen then is all of the other Democratic senators, and probably President Biden as well, are going to come to them and say, guys, we're all going to get screwed here and shellacked in the elections if we don't start passing the things that we promised. And I think that at that point, it's going to take some time to get there. But I think that after major Democratic priorities, major Biden promises run up ground against the filibuster, other Democratic senators, people who are up for re-election this cycle, are going to come to them and say, guys, you can't kill the team like this. And I think that is the kind of thing that inside the room with these senators often is very persuasive. So I'm optimistic. While I'm pessimistic about the chances of bipartisanship, I'm optimistic that the writing is going to be on the wall sooner rather than later. And even Manchin and Sinema ultimately will come around to some version of reform.
Sorry to interrupt you, Adam, but to go back to the Obama administration, again, we see President Biden now, obviously he was vice president at the time, and he believes, and you can correct me if you don't think this is correct, he believes that the Senate was like it was when he was there for all those 30 some odd years in the Senate, the congeniality, everybody liked each other, there was a lot of backslapping. Now it doesn't seem like it's that. Obviously a lot of these senators he served with are gone. They're, they died off, they left office, they retired, whatever it may be. And it feels like we're going back to Obama 2.0 with the Biden administration. Same people, same thoughts of bipartisanship. That is not going to work with the same people they're fighting against with Mitch McConnell. So we're going to get the same results. Are you worried about that? I mean, this is common sense.
Yeah, no, I am worried about it. I do think, talking to people in the Biden administration, I think there's a little bit greater degree of awareness that this is not going to work. I think there's no downside politically to sort of continuing to talk about bipartisanship. And frankly, I think it gives Biden more credibility when that tape runs out and the bipartisanship isn't happening, for Biden to come around and say, listen, I tried. And you know me, Joe Biden, if there was any way to facilitate bipartisanship, I would have done it. And I think people will give him that benefit of the doubt. And then when he says, look, this is the only way we can get things done, and I'm here to get things done, it will be persuasive, not just with senators, but with voters as well. So I think there's probably differences of opinion within the White House. I think some people believe that Biden can perform this magic, but I think others are more realistic. And so, the thing about among the caucus, it's interesting, in 2009, we had more seats. We had 58 to 60 seats, depending on the month. Now we only have 50. But I would say that there are more votes for filibuster reform now, even though we have fewer seats overall, than there were in 2009. Because I think more senators have lived through the reality of the McConnell era. They don't have a lot of patience for pretending that McConnell's going to allow bipartisanship to happen. So I think that we'll continue to see this rhetoric for a little bit of time, but the Senate is already moving towards using reconciliation, which is something we can talk about. But it's an end run around the filibuster for certain kinds of issues, not a lot of issues, but certain kinds. And the fact that the Senate's already moving forward with this process, to me, suggests that they aren't going to give this bipartisan pretending a lot of time, and they'll switch gears more quickly than they did during the Obama administration.
This is Adam Jentleson. He is a former Deputy Chief of Staff for Senator Harry Reid. Also has the new book out. It's Kill Switch: The Rise of the Modern Senate and the Crippling of American Democracy. So, Adam, let's kick this around even more. I do want to get to reconciliation now. Now, we know Bernie Sanders is the chair of the Budget Committee. Thank God for that, at least in my mind. We'll move on to that. So, with Senator Sanders, the chair of the Budget Committee, he has talked about using reconciliation to get big fundamental changes done. I know the Democrats can only use reconciliation. What is it, 3 times? Is it once a year or something to that effect?
Yeah, it's twice. It's once a year. And so, the Senate session is 2 years long. So you can do it twice, once in 2021 and once in 2022. They also seem to have a third option because Republicans didn't use it last year. So that one rolls over, like rollover minutes here. So they could potentially do it 3 times. And then some people even argue that you could split each one into 2 and do it 6 times. So there are differing opinions here. And I think Senator Sanders is 100% right to use it. I think that it will hopefully allow us to pass some big policies. You could probably do most of Biden's COVID relief package that he's proposed through reconciliation. You could probably do a lot of infrastructure spending through reconciliation, even some climate-related policies, student debt cancellation, minimum wage. All of these things are possible through reconciliation. That's obviously very good. The problem with reconciliation is that there are certain things you cannot do through it that must get done. And those things include any kind of democracy reforms or voting rights reforms. People are talking about a new John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which I think is essential after we've seen how rampant voter suppression is in this country. That's never going to be able to get done through reconciliation. And so after you've used reconciliation and you've exhausted what you can do through it, which I think is great, and I absolutely trust Senator Sanders to use it to the full extent that it can, and he said he's committed to doing that, you're still going to be left with the fact that most civil rights issues, gun control, lots of climate change issues, they can't be done through reconciliation. And so ultimately you come back to the filibuster, and you're either going to have to accept that we're not going to pass a John Lewis Voting Rights Act, or you're going to have to reform the filibuster. And that conversation may not come to a head for several months, but I do think there's no way around it. And I think that's where we're ultimately headed.
So as citizens, what should we do? I'm in Florida right now. We have Rick Scott and Marco Rubio. That's, like calling no one. But
Right.
but if we do have people listening in Florida who do have those senators, what should they do if they are Democrats and they want to get rid of this filibuster?
I think you should call Senate leadership. You can call the Senate Democratic leaders. You can call the White House. I think that what's important to understand, I think you're right that, voting rights, it does, it applies to young people, college towns. West Virginia has those as well. But even if you assume, as you said, that Manchin is not a high priority for him, it is a high priority for Biden. And I think that President Biden cannot afford to let that issue go. And so having him here, that the filibuster reform is necessary to pass these kinds of things, will be helpful. Ultimately, he's going to have to come around on this if it's going to happen. So I think that applying pressure, making your voice heard and just letting people know that this is important to you is really important. Senators do pay attention to phone calls. Obviously, it's best if you come from their state. But just knowing that this is a national issue, an issue of national importance, and there is going to be an election in Florida, the Senate election, obviously in 2022. So pushing the Democratic candidates in the primary to take strong positions on this, voting for candidates in the primary who support filibuster reform, and will bring that attitude to the Senate will be very critical. So I think that just anything folks can do to elevate this as an issue and put it in front of the White House, Senate leaders, and local candidates or Senate candidates running in primaries will be very important. I think when it becomes a referendum in a primary, let's say the Democratic primary in Florida turns on the issue of the filibuster, and the candidate who wins is the one who has the strongest position, that sends a message to all other Democrats that this is a very politically salient issue. So I think that's another important consideration here.
What do you feel like is the rise of partisanship? Is it the push of money in politics? We go back to McCain-Feingold and how that ended, and we haven't really had comprehensive campaign finance reform in this country. So a lot of these politics are owned by the corporations, by these big money special interests, and that's what they're going to do the job for. Those people, not the regular working people in this country. Is that where that partisanship is coming from, money in politics, or where is it coming from?
Well, I think the answer is sort of all of the above, in my opinion, because I think that there are larger forces at work here in America. I mean, we've seen that this concept of the big sort, in every aspect of our lives. You see it in people, liberals shopping at Whole Foods and conservatives shopping at Kroger. I don't know where conservatives shop. I shop at Whole Foods, but and Safeway. But it's a phenomenon that sociologists have documented for a long time. It is in every aspect of our lives. But in the Senate, it unquestionably the corporate influence is playing a role in partisanship and in gridlocking our democracy, because it's all about a reward system, right? And Republicans are rewarded with campaign contributions, with all sorts of financial support if they block change. Corporations, there are generally some policies they want to see passed. They want to lower the corporate tax rate. There are certain kind of protections that they're seeking. But generally, what they're seeking is no change. They don't want anything to happen. They don't want regulations to be increased. They don't want corporate governance laws to be passed requiring them to have union representatives on their boards and things like that. And they certainly don't want taxes to be raised on the wealthy and corporations. So most of their agenda is served by blocking change. And so they will seek out and reward politicians who toe the party line and block anything Democrats want to do, any sort of change they want to make. It wasn't that long ago where you could really have a reasonable chance at getting Republican support for responsible, even raising taxes on rich people, but things like corporate governance, trying to change the incentives that are driving, making shareholder value the primary thing driving corporations. But Republicans today will never participate and will never cooperate with Democrats on those sorts of things, because the corporate money has gone out of control. It's not just donations to the candidates themselves. There's all these dark money groups that are set up after the Citizens United decision, where corporations can give unlimited funds to groups that aren't technically supposed to be not political, but that's the legal definition, but it's a joke. They are extremely political. A lot of the political ads that you see on TV are run by these issue-oriented groups who claim that their primary purpose is education. And these groups are directly aligned with the politicians. They're often run by aides to those politicians who will leave the office of working for a senator and then go run one of these groups. And ostensibly, supposedly, they're not coordinating with each other, but they're still allowed to socialize so they can see each other at dinner and discuss whatever they want to discuss. It's not hard to see how these very thin legal prohibitions are worked around. And those groups will reward whoever obstructs the most. And they have hundreds of millions of dollars to spend because of the unlimited corporate donations. So it's unquestionable that the rise of corporate funding of political activities has contributed greatly to the increase in partisanship and the increase in obstruction.
Do you think there's a lot of weak Democratic candidates that just don't stand up and fight? They, just buckle down and act weak. We saw that throughout the Obama years, that these people are supposed to be Democrats, but they vote with the Republicans 90 some odd % of the time. It's just after a while, for people that are in their, I'm 31 years old, people that are in their 20s too, that are Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders supporters, we're just sick and tired of this silliness. It's the same old, same old. No one wants to get anything done, and they just blame the Republicans. And like you wrote the book. It is about the Republicans. Yes, some of it. But you need to grow a spine and a backbone and stand up to Mitch McConnell, stand up to these other Republicans such as Cruz and Josh Hawley too, that are destructing the country right now. And a lot of these Democrats, they talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. So what is your opinion on this?
Yeah, I completely agree, and I actually think, you know, not to bring everything back to filibuster reform, but to bring everything back to filibuster reform, you know, this is one of the things that it would change, because right now Democrats can blame the fact that they didn't pass things, that they didn't deliver on the filibuster. You know, you have 50 Democrats in the Senate right now. With the filibuster, you need to get to 60, and so Democrats can you know, give themselves a pass and go weak by saying, well, sorry, we couldn't get 10 Republican votes. So if you get rid of the filibuster and you allow Democrats to pass things with 50 votes, that means they are on the hook to deliver, and there are no excuses. You know, they promised these things. They can't go blame Republicans for filibustering. It's on them to deliver. I think this is healthy. I think that they should be held to account to deliver the things they promised. And you should get rid of the filibuster so that they can actually deliver them. Once you get rid of that 60 vote threshold, it's on them. And we can call them and we can say, pass minimum wage, pass, you know, a millionaire's tax, pass all the things that you promised you would do. I don't want to hear about the filibuster. I don't want to hear any excuses. You know, you can do it now with Democratic votes. So let's deliver.
Right. I have a couple of audience questions before we end the interview. First question here is, obviously we know there's an impeachment trial right now. I believe that President Trump should be impeached. But what I'm worried about, and apparently what this other person is asking me in the question, but this also is my opinion too, I'm worried about the Senate getting boggled down. This is not going to take place until February 8th, so it's a few days from now. But, you know, we have to go through the trial. Then, obviously, Pat Leahy, you know, hopefully he's well, but he actually just went down. He was sick and went home. He went to the hospital. But are you worried about this now, that the Senate could get boggled down in this impeachment trial? There's going to be no conviction. There's only 5 Republicans right now on record out of 17 that's needed to convict the president of and impeach him rather, and make sure that he doesn't run for office again. So I'm worried that they're going to get boggled down in this, and this is going to create all this rhetoric and all this anger back up with the Trump right, and it could be another 2010, the summer of horrors, I would say, with all these town hall meetings. You remember this, and a bad swamp for the Democratic Party in 2022.
Yeah, I think it's just a quick trial is the best way to go. You know, I think they have to do it. You've got to put this on record. But I don't think it needs to take long. You know, I mean, you're right. It won't start till February 28th. I'm sorry, February 8th. But I think that, you know, it can go quickly. And I think that's what they should do. Look, if there was any hope of Republicans joining over and convicting the president and preventing him from running for office again, I would say hold a long trial, have tons of witnesses, you know, really press the case. But we know what Republicans are going to do. You know, like you said, they all but 5 of them voted against even having the trial. So they're going to let Trump off because this is Trump's party still. Sad to say, but it's true. So they're going to vote to defend this president, this ex-president, just like they always do. And, you know, it's important to put them on record and make them cast that vote, because I think that's a politically bad vote for them to cast. But I don't think we should take a lot of time to do it. I'm in favor of making the trial as short and sweet as possible, like a few days, so that we don't get bogged down and we can move on to passing the issues that are really going to change people's lives.
What is Biden's biggest challenge as president?
I think it's filibuster. I think that ultimately, you know, look, he's got majorities in both houses. Yeah. He's got popular support for a lot of his policies. He's got very clear policy proposals. You know, he doesn't lack any of these other things. He's got a lot going for him. His biggest problem is going to be Republican obstruction that's going to block all these things. And you can have all the support in the world. I mean, in the book, I talk about, you know, this Manchin Toomey background checks bill in 2013 after the Newtown massacre, where you had a bill supported by 55 senators, Republicans and Democrats. This was an issue, expanding background checks, that polled literally at 90%, like off the charts. You had everything you're supposed to have in our democratic system, but you couldn't pass it because Republicans used the filibuster to raise the threshold to 60 votes. And I think that's what Biden is going to see. He's got popular policies. He's got smart policies. He's got control of both houses. But ultimately the success or failure of his administration is going to come down to whether or not he decides to reform the filibuster so he can actually pass all these things.
So we have all these young progressives coming up. So I do see hope for the progressive movement and them pushing a lot of these establishment figures to the left, which I think is great for our party and the country in general. Who do you think is going to step up in maybe 2024 and challenge Biden or Kamala Harris, depending on what happens as far as that dynamic? Or do you see a progressive challenge for the left in 2024? Do you see someone rising in the Senate? Maybe an AOC runs against Chuck Schumer in the primary. We've heard a lot of talk about that in the Hill and other newspaper articles. What do you see for the progressive movement as Bernie kind of, wanders away from that, eventually?
This is where I think the Biden's future and Schumer's future is entirely in their own hands, because I think that if they listen to the left and deliver on the promises that they made, I think that the positive thing that we have going for us is that President Biden listened. A lot of his policy proposals that he advanced during the general election moved dramatically to the left. And I think a lot of the groups out there will say the same thing. Folks like the Sunrise Movement, Justice Democrats, we're happy with the direction policy-wise, at least in the proposals, that Biden moved. Schumer's come out in favor of canceling student debt. These are clear, they're not, it's clear what's happening here. They're being pressured by the left, and they're coming around and doing these things. So that's the proposal stage, right? They've come out in favor of these things. So now the future depends entirely on whether they follow through. And if they deliver, because they have the power to deliver, I think that they might be able to avoid challenges from the left. If they don't deliver, then I think they are inviting challenges from the left, and I think that's fair. And I think that the left should hold them accountable if they fail to deliver, because they do have the power to deliver. I think there'll be some really interesting races in 2022 in the Senate. One of the candidates I'm watching very closely is John Fetterman in Pennsylvania.
Yes, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was there in 2016, and when Fetterman ran for the Senate in the primary, and establishment Democrats circled the wagons around Katie McGinty as the establishment candidate, and pushed Fetterman out of the primary, and then McGinty went on to lose to Pat Toomey in a race that 100% Democrats should have won. Going away. And if you imagine, one or two Senate seats makes a huge difference. Not winning that seat really mattered. We would have one extra vote. Maybe we'd have enough votes to give her the filibuster right now. This stuff really matters. So Fetterman this time around, I don't know what the establishment is going to do. Hopefully they're not stupid and they don't try to defeat him. But I think he is. I'm a big fan of his. I think he could definitely be a future leader for progressives. And he's exactly the kind of leader who straight talker, comfortable in his own skin, that we need to continue to model the kind of leadership. And it would be great to see him win in a state like Pennsylvania, that, to show how progressives can perform statewide in a critical state like that. So I'm closely watching that race, and I think he will hopefully be a future leader of the progressive movement too.
That's someone that can get Trump voters to vote for him.
Exactly.
100%.
Yep.
I want to move on to, there's two more audience questions, then we're going to end the interview. Again, Adam, thanks so much for your time so far. My thing is, as a person that supports Medicare for all, as a person that supports a Green New Deal, I do agree with you. The Biden administration has moved to the left. We saw that after the convention, and also that Bernie Biden talks as far as the policy proposals in that aspect. What would you say to the progressive viewers that are listening to this, that they really are upset about, they're upset about Biden winning, but they're happy, but they're upset, but they want Medicare for all. They need Medicare for all. They need a $15 minimum wage. We know that's on the bill right now as far as the COVID bill, but they need these big, broad policies, and also with the Green New Deal. Do you see these ever coming to light? Because we heard Hillary Clinton in New Hampshire in 2016 laugh and say Medicare for all will never, ever come to pass, when she ran on that in 2008, and so did Barack Obama in 2008. And then when they come into the presidency, not Hillary Clinton, but Barack Obama did, they run on Romney Care, which ends up being Obamacare. So what would you say to these people? And Joe Biden also said that he, would veto Medicare for all if it came to his desk. So how do you give progressives hope well, on Medicare for all, on a Green New Deal, on all these big fundamental policies, when the establishment has been basically kicking their behind every time when they need these policies right now.
Well, I think progressives have the upper hand in the policy conversation because the thing that they have going for them is that these policies are actually extremely popular. And I think that, it's almost like Biden can be sort of a Trojan horse for some important progressive policies here. I think that, look, the prospects of actually getting full Medicare for all, I'm not going to blow smoke here and pretend that that's a strong possibility right now. But I do think an expanded, aggressive public option to give people the option to buy into government healthcare alongside private insurance is a real possibility. And I think that is something that the idea behind the public option in the first place, when it was conceived in 2008, 2007, I actually worked on the campaign of John Edwards from North Carolina, who ran for president and helped conceive of the public option at the time. The idea was that it was a pathway to Medicare for all, because once people got on government healthcare, they would really like it, and that would become the most popular option, and that this would transition us to a Medicare for all system. The government-sponsored healthcare would be more competitive. They'd be able to negotiate better prices. It would just be better overall, and would slowly drive the private insurance industry out of business. So, while Medicare for all full is probably perhaps not realistic in the next year or two, I think pushing for that expanded public option, that is something that probably can be done through reconciliation. And certainly can be done if we get rid of the filibuster. Pushing for things like that to be done on a 50 vote margin is a good focus of progressives' energy, because those are things that will deliver real results. You mentioned minimum wage, same thing. You're never going to get 60 votes for that with Republicans, but you can get 50 Democrats and Vice President Harris to pass it. So going to Biden, and saying, look, you promised these results. We're not putting these in your mouth. We're not telling you to support something you didn't support, but you supported these very aggressive progressive policies. You listened to Senator Sanders, you listened to Senator Warren, and you came around on these policies. And so now show us that it's not just words, because you can get 50 Democrats, you, Joe Biden, if you decide to put your energy behind it, you can get them to support these things. So let's see you deliver.
Can you say what your biggest accomplishment you think is with Senator Reid?
Yeah, I mean, we passed a lot of great things with Senator Reid. When I was working for him, we passed Don't Ask, Don't Tell. We passed the Dodd-Frank bill. We passed a lot of major worker protections. A lot of this was in the period before Republicans took back the House majority in 2010. So I'm proud of a lot of that stuff. I'm also proud that we went nuclear and started this process in 2013, because I think that was the path that set us down this road, I think, that will eventually end in reform. And we were able to confirm a lot of Obama judges because we went nuclear. If we hadn't done that, there would be many fewer Obama judges serving lifetime appointments today. There would have been many more vacancies for McConnell and Trump to fill. So that was a long process. It took us a long time to get there, but I'm proud of the work that we did there.
So speak about Democracy Forward as we end the interview, what it's about. And we also talk about, obviously, it's getting corruption out of politics. So with Democracy Forward, is it about getting that money out of politics or just corruption in general? What is Democracy Forward?
Yeah, that's right. So it's a legal watchdog organization. And what we do is we look at ways that corporate influence is affecting rulemaking in the executive branch. So we try to create transparency, and we bring lawsuits where we think that the federal government is listening to corporations in a way that runs afoul of the law, because there are actually laws that dictate how you're supposed to make rules, how you're supposed to do executive actions. And those laws involve transparency, sunlight, and those sorts of provisions. You're not supposed to give too much input to industry or corporations. And so when we see that happening, and it's happened a lot under the Trump administration, where they were listening, to the industry when they were making school lunch rules, and they're listening, to the big agriculture instead of listening to consumer groups. We brought a lawsuit there, and we won, and we were able to stop them from rolling back school nutrition standards. So that's the sort of stuff that we do, and I'm very proud of the work there.
All right. So as we end, and again, this is Adam Jentleson, and the book is Kill Switch, The Rise of the Modern Senate, and also The Crippling of the American Democracy. So Adam, as we end, can you tell people where they can find the book and learn a little more about you in general?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find the book anywhere books are sold. If you want to go to an independent bookshop, we're on bookshop.org, lots of other places. And you can find me on Twitter. That's where I do most of my commentating. I'm at Jentleson, at AJENTLESON on Twitter.
Adam, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it today.
Thanks for having me. It was great to be here.